So, welcome to one of my favorite sessions at eCommerce Growth Summit. I'm here with Tim Ash. He's one of
One of
my
your favorites.
yes, one of my favorite because we need to not we need to be a bit impartial here. But however, Tim Ash is one of my favorite heroes into CRO. So I've been watching this guy since I was just checking the conversion rate in analytics in Bucharest at our online car insurance website back 7 years ago. And Tim, thanks a lot for what you're doing, and thanks for the immense work and let's say effort and commitment to make the websites better and convert better. You've been inspiring for me, and welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you so much, Valentin. Very, very happy to be here.
Great. So the stage is yours. Yeah.
Okay, well, let's just jump right in. Thank you, everyone, for joining me. I know that this is a very difficult time for all of us, and I just wanted to say I think you're doing something smart, which is improving your own skills right now. It's not the time to be complacent. It's the time to help others and sharpen your own tools and get ready for the recovery, which will happen soon. So we're all in this together. I'm going to just jump right into my presentation. Today, I'm going to talk about the primal brain and unleashing the primal brain. And what I mean by that is talking about the unconscious, the one that really makes decisions. But I want to start a little further back. So my question to all of you is, why do we need a brain? Why do we need a brain in the first place? Well, I'm going to do a very quick recap of the last 13.8 billion years. So if you think about it, what happened is we started with nuclear furnaces and stars and emptiness. And then around those stars, we started getting clumps of dirt. On some of those clumps of dirt, like ours, we had sloshing liquid seas. And then this slide is particularly poignant for me. Viruses came along, self-copying matter. First, they'll be here long after we're gone. And unfortunately, they pop up their ugly heads like what's going on right now. But that was just a stepping stone in terms of the type of life we have on Earth. Next was life in containers, cells. If you really think about how amazing a cell is in a body, it has a factory, it has a police force, it has a hospital, has garbage disposal, builders, architects, traffic cops, and so on. All of this inside of one little cell. So life was doing just fine without containers and with cells. So my question for you is, why do we need a brain? I mean, it sounds really strange, but we rarely think about that. And not all forms of life need a brain. Plants don't seem to need a brain. Conditions can change. In fact, they often do for plants. I'm sure this tree didn't decide to plant itself in the middle of a lake. But trees and plants do the best they can. So I'm going to come back to my original question, which is, why do we need a brain? Well, let me tell you about this strange little creature called the sea squirt. It swims around and during its life and finds a nice place to attach to. And then the first thing it does when it attaches to this rock or this piece of coral is it eats its own brain. That's right, you heard it. It eats its own brain because it doesn't need it anymore. And there's our first little hint of why we need a brain. So what it does is it digests its own brain, uses that energy to create a digestive system and opens its mouth, and then food just kind of falls into its mouth and it's very happy. But it needed a brain to swim around and to attach to a particular piece of rock or coral. And there's our answer. Brains evolved to deal with the challenges of moving through our environment. So basically, when the world changes very quickly, that's when we need a brain. And that's what we need a brain for. So I've made these quick little tweetable slides. I understand that the deck will be available to all of you afterwards. So feel free to share these later. But brains evolved for the challenges of moving through our environment. So we have a brain that's there for moving through the environment. Let's kind of take a closer look at how it works. I'm sure most of you have heard this idea of having a left brain and a right brain, a creative side and a logical side. Well, that's basically total bullshit. That's not how brains really work. I'm not going to go too deep into the biology, but if we were to explode a brain, and again, please don't try this at home with explosives, but it's a lot more complicated. You have what we consider the big part of the brain, the cerebral cortex. If we pry that apart, inside of it, there's the limbic system, or our emotional brain, and below that is our brain stem and all of the other things that are responsible for keeping us alive. So you can think of it as kind of an evolutionary patchwork. There's better developed older brains and then new capabilities that came online on top of that. So let's look at each of these in turn a little more in more detail. So we think of the very height of being human as being logical, overriding our animal emotions and so on, kind of like being like Mr. Spock on Star Trek. The probability that the Klingons will kill us is 98.7%, Captain. Well, thank you, Mr. Spock. That's the reasoning brain, right? But it turns out underneath it all, these other brains continue to function. So the emotional brain is the one that we share with all mammals. About 300 million years ago, mammals started running around between the legs of the dinosaurs, and we're mammals. And one of the things that characterizes us is herd instinct. Other animals can operate in large herds too, but we actually form closer bonds with the other people in our herd. So it became important to think about how we feel about them. We're social creatures. Another thing that came along with feeling is memory, and this is very important. If something felt good, we tried to remember it. If something was awful, we tried to remember it. The important stuff, we tried to remember it. So feelings and formation of memories are closely bound up inside of our brain. But there's even a more fundamental level, or I'd say a more evolutionarily earlier one underneath that as well, and that is our reactive brain. Sometimes it's called our brainstem or our reptilian brain because we share it with birds and dinosaurs and snakes and lizards, automatic reactions. And I'll talk a little bit more about what each of these brains do and why they're around and what their responsibilities are. But the key takeaway here is that you really have three brains working together all at the same time, reacting, feeling, and reasoning. So let's dive down a little deeper into how these work, the more primitive parts of the brain in particular. Well, the first thing is I'm a Leo on the zodiac. We're known for sleeping 20 hours a day. Lions are lazy, so are our brains. Our brains are lazy. They don't like to think. In fact, if you think of cognitive effort or conscious thought, we get tired by the end of the day. We stop making decisions very well. We used up all of our capacity to think. So by default, because our brain uses so much energy, as you'll see later, we don't like to think. We're lazy. The other thing that our brain likes is simple choices. Let me ask you a quick question. Which is the big dog? The one on the left or the one on the right? Okay, that was a rhetorical question. Please don't answer in the chat. It's obvious, and that's the way our brain likes it. So for example, if I were to say, wow, you could buy OmniConvert software for $10 a month or $100 a year. Well, is that a simple choice? No, not really. So we like simple choices, obvious choices. Our brain doesn't like to, again, spend energy thinking about more subtle stuff. We're not set up for math or subtle discriminations. We can't even tell differences among things if they're too similar to each other. And then another characteristic of our primitive brains are we're very impatient. We're really good. These primitive parts of the brain are always on. Unlike our newer parts of the brain, they don't actually get tired. They're always working. They're processing massive amounts of information all the time, and they do it really quickly. So what you call your gut reactions or your quick sense or intuitions, those are operating all the time, and they're there to help us survive and make decisions on a split-second basis. So to kind of summarize what I was saying about the characteristics of the lower parts of the brain, people are lazy, impatient, and like simple choices. And so as a challenge for us marketers, I'd like us to look in the mirror. Actually, let's modify this slide. Instead of saying people, put the phrase visitors to your website. Visitors to your website are lazy, impatient, and like simple choices. Unfortunately, many of us have designed websites for patient people that are willing to put in the effort and willing to wrestle with the complexity that we're trying to get them to understand. That's not what you should be designing for. Hey, let's talk about motivation a little bit. The primitive part of the brain is actually motivated by what I call the 4F. Some of you may be familiar with those. I'm hearing some kind of mic noise. I'm not sure, Valentina, if that's you or not, or someone else in the control room. All right, so let's talk about the 4 things that really matter, the 4 Fs. This is your brain in survival mode. The first F is fighting. There are animals trying to eat us. There are other people trying to hurt us. This is the world of survival. So one option you always have is to fight. And the stronger organism, the better prepared one, will win, will dominate. But that's not always a great idea, is it? Because you might not be the strongest. So what's another option that your survival brain has? Well, it's to run away, fight and flight. If I run faster than you, I can survive that encounter, get to fight another day, and conserve my energy, prevent myself from being hurt or even killed in some cases. So that's very, very important. Another motivating factor is we have to get energy for our brains. I'll talk about this a little more later, but feeding, we're constantly looking for food. That never ends. And unlike today's world where we have endless empty carbohydrates that we can consume and can be stored in our pantry for weeks on end or months or even years, you had to get food daily and you couldn't carry it with you. So our brains are very tuned to finding food in the environment and having enough energy to carry on. And finally, there's the 4th F. I'm sure that all of you have figured out what that is. So please chat it if you know it. It is fornication. Of course, that's what you were going to say. So one of the things we're always looking for is to survive and to throw our genes into the next generation. So whenever there's an event that something in our environment says, wow, this might be a mating opportunity, it has our full attention. In fact, we're willing to take enormous risks for mating opportunities because it's kind of an all or nothing event. Either my genes continue or they don't. It's a very binary thing. And all of those billions of years of evolution of life on this planet succeeded because your ancestors, whether they're the more primitive primates or mammals or back to the lizards and things that slithered out of the sea, or even viruses, all of those primitive ancestors did one thing, and they all did it to make sure that you're here right now. They survived and long enough to reproduce. So this is another deep survival need that we have. So to kind of sum it up, our brains don't learn when it comes to these basic survival drives, and they're operating most of the time. Our primitive brain really only cares about fight, flight, feeding, and fornication. And I think this is probably giving you a little different perspective than having your logical brain or thinking that we're making decisions logically. And I want to keep hammering away at that. So one thing that we know, and I'm going to give you some practical strategies now that you as a marketer can use. And the first of these is pain avoidance as motivation. Let me give you a simple choice. You ready? Here, burn your hand on a hot stove or win the lottery. I bet you I know which one's going to motivate you more. It's going to be the hot stove. Pain and the potential for avoiding pain are the strongest motivators. By contrast, it's like win $1 million and pleasurable opportunities. They're nice, but they're not going to be as strong. And this is really, really important. So here's a key takeaway from this strategy. Pain avoidance is about 2 or 2.5 times as powerful as positive motivation. And yet we don't do this as marketers. And this is really, really unfortunate. So if you think about it, I've heard this all the time from brands. We're a nice brand. We don't say mean things about our competitors or even mean things in general because we're nice. If you're doing that in your marketing, you're really fighting with one hand tied behind your back. So unless, well, that's the way I like to put it, it's true in the gym and it's also true in marketing, no pain, no gain. If you can't create a pain for me and then rub salt into the wound and make it hurt extra, then you will not have the gain as a marketer. You will not be able to benefit from that. So here's a couple of things you can try. Don't sell the positive outcomes. Life is going to be wonderful. No, first focus on the pain and say, if you stay on your current track, things are going to be really, really bad and it's going to hurt a lot. And you haven't even thought of all the implications of why it's going to hurt or how bad it's going to get. So if you focus on the pain, people will be moved to action. Another tip for you, since we want to avoid pain and loss in general, is always start with your fully loaded option first. I'm sure a lot of you have seen this kind of bronze, silver, gold. Here's our 3 packages, and we always put them in that order of bronze, silver, gold. Well, no, what you should do is start with your gold package with everything included in it, and then say, hey, if you want to step down to the silver package, you're going to lose the following things. You see the psychology of that? None of us want to lose something. So by anchoring on a much more powerful, expensive option, whatever your gold version is, and then saying you're going to lose things as you step down to the other versions or the other options, that's much more compelling. All right, let's go to another key insight from evolutionary psychology, and that is most of the time, like I said, our brains want to do nothing. They're on or they're off by default. They're doing automatic processing. So this primitive part of the brain is efficiently doing a lot of things. The conscious part of the brain is not really woken up that often. So this is a really staggering statistic, but if you were to do nothing, if you just want to lie down, not move your muscles voluntarily and lay in bed all day, your basic metabolism, about 1/4 of your energy is going to go to just powering your brain. And to give you some sense of how disproportionate that is, I mean, it's only about 3 pounds of body weight, or about less than 1.5 kilograms, and it's using 25% of your energy needs just to maintain it. Compare that to the closest kind of bigger brain primates, our cousins, the chimpanzees, gorillas, all the other primates and great apes use about an average of 8% of their resting metabolism to power their brains. We're using 3 times as much. So most of the time we keep our brain turned off or parts of it shut down. We only work on the autopilot parts. We don't actually use the reasoning parts of the brain, the newer ones evolutionarily. So the default response of the brain, this is the key insight, is to do nothing and conserve energy. Now, behavioral economics, we call this, with our fancy Latin phrases, the status quo bias, which is basically means if I have a range of choices, my default choice is to do nothing, literally. So how can we as marketers take advantage of that? Well, one thing we can do is to make sure that the most profitable option for us is the easiest for them to act on, so that the trigger to get them to do the behavior is literally to do nothing. So if you do nothing, we're going to sign you up for the gold plan. If you want to sign up for a cheaper plan, you have to click a radio button or make another choice or do something, some actual action. So think about how you're structuring and what you're incentivizing. What is your default option? If that's not your most profitable thing, you're doing it backwards. Okay. And of course, it also talks about the power of subscriptions and auto renew offers. If you can in some way incorporate that into your business model, that's very powerful, because once I signed up, I literally have to do nothing. You can reach into my wallet and take money out every month. Auto renews and subscriptions work on that. Do you think about your phone bill too much, or your cable or internet bill? No, because they're on a subscription basis. You only see them on maybe on an occasional credit card statement along with all your other charges. And you go, yeah, that's just that internet charge. Well, it's getting taken out of your bank account every month. And that's the power of doing nothing. I don't even have to think about it. It's not visible. It's not surfaced. So definitely take advantage of that if you can in your business model. All right, let's talk about the concept of ownership, because this is another thing that is strongly embedded in us because of the kind of evolutionary path that we've taken. Now, let's talk about how human beings actually lived for most of the time on the planet. It wasn't flying around on airplanes and living in huge multi-million person cities that are high density. Now, those things have their advantages, but that's not what we're designed for. For most of human existence, there were less than 1 million of us on the planet. And we just walked around, and we had bands of family and friends and cousins and distant relatives, and lived in small nomadic tribes. We only settled down about 10,000 years ago when the climate stabilized enough for us to develop agriculture and be able to stay in one place. So think of this as our grandfather. This is your grandfather here. Great grandfather, but nevertheless. So what could he carry? What would you carry if you were him? Weapons, perhaps? Maybe some kind of gourd with water in it. Maybe your child, learn to walk, you little bastard. I don't want to carry you all the time, but that's about it, the essentials, right? And if you had to pick up a sharp rock that you think would make a good arrow point, even in that circumstance, you'd have to go, can I find a better sharp rock just down the road? How long do I have to carry this thing? And, what's the energy expenditure of carrying it? These are really life or death decisions that we ultimately have to make. So we have a really strong bias about ownership. In other words, anything we choose to own, we get really attached to and overvalue. Now, one thing that I always hear about is that the storage industry is recession proof. And I think that's certainly true. We just store more crap. If it doesn't fit in our house, if it doesn't fit in our closets, if it doesn't fit in our garage, then we'll get a storage unit and we'll store it there forever. And all of this junk that we could just as easily replace by going to a store, we hang on to it because we feel a sense of ownership of it. That's the key. Once we own it, we think it's much more valuable than it actually is. So to kind of sum up, the evolutionary concept is we overvalue things that we own or have had a chance to handle or influence or customize, anything like that. Again, how can we take advantage of this as marketers? Well, here's some thoughts. Let people test drive your products or services. I know a lot of companies, so for example, software companies like OmniConvert, you have it's a monthly subscription, right? Well, have a trial and don't be stingy about the trial, not a 7-day trial and maybe not even a 30-day trial. Let me try it on for 45 days or 90 days. There's mattress companies that say sleep on our mattress for 90 days. And if you're not happy, we'll take it back. Now, do you think after 90 days with your old mattress propped up against the wall as an insurance policy, you're going to do that? No. Long before that, you'll say, yeah, I feel like I own it. I've slept on that mattress. Let's throw the old one away. And that's that. So let them test drive your product, ideally as long as possible. It might delay your revenue recognition a little, but it sure is going to skyrocket your take rate and your conversion rate. Encourage them to customize it and configure it for their own use. If I'm buying a laptop and I'm thinking about, I'll get the extra graphics card so I can play Call of Duty on it, or I want the terabyte hard disk so I can load all my videos on it, and I'm customizing it, then I'm envisioning getting the full value of that product. And just that customization process makes me feel better about it. I feel a sense of ownership just by thinking about how to customize it and envisioning how I would use it. And give people the illusion of control. You don't have to dictate everything. You can let them, in their free form way, take ownership of it, start and stop the trial process, whatever you can do to make them feel like they're driving events, that's really, really important. All right, let's continue on to the next strategy, and that is about visual bias. As most of you know, we have two different types of systems that combine in our visual system, rods and cones, right? One of them sees motion and the other one sees fine detail. Now, unfortunately, that fine color detail is only in 2% of your visual field in the very center. So your eyes got this very expensive hardware in the middle, and then it has motor control to move it around so you can see detail everywhere. And the rest of it is responding to just kind of grayscale and motion. And we have 220 degrees of peripheral vision for motion detection, so the bear doesn't eat us. So really, the way that we experience the world is like this. It's blurry and it's grayscale. And then we move the center of our eye around and we say, oh, look, that's something interesting. Oh, look, there's something interesting too. And we keep jittering our eye around through these automatic movements called saccades. We can't even detect them. They're really fast. And so at the end of the day, what we think we see is a 3D world in color, in stereo. That's great, but that's not what we really see. So your brain manufactured 98% of visual reality. That's the coolest magic trick ever. And it's not passive. The brain decides what to look at in this world. So here's a thought for you. You have 10 times as many neurons controlling the motion of your eye than you do going back from the eye to the brain to process the visual information. So it's a very, very active process. So what can we as marketers do to take advantage of this? Well, understand there's something I came up with a concept a few years ago called the visual hierarchy. I will not argue with any of you that are direct response copywriters and think that text is important. Absolutely, they're magic words. It's important to understand people's motivations and everything I've talked about here already, incorporate those basic needs into our messaging. But think of text as a firecracker. Images will override that. An image is what we're designed for, not reading letters, not understanding what they mean, but looking at the physical world. So think of images as a grenade. In the presence of an image, we're not going to read small text below it. We're going to look at the image, especially if it's one of people's faces. That's a whole nother separate story I can't go into today. But the thing that we're really keyed in on is motion, that 220 degrees of peripheral vision. And the reason that's important is because you did not survive in a world where something in your visual field was rapidly moving. That could be a bear. And I don't need to know if it's a polar bear or a grizzly bear or a koala bear. I don't need to know how many sharp teeth it has. I just need to know where it's moving and how fast, and is it getting closer to me or further from me? That's important. We can't not look at motion. Unfortunately, a lot of marketers are undisciplined, so that they're using motion in a sloppy way all over their websites and landing pages. To me, in the visual hierarchy, motion is the nuclear option, if you will, of last resort. So clean up your visual experiences, remove distracting motion, tone down those powerful graphics, start thinking about a visual hierarchy and kind of the importance and relative importance of your calls to action on the page. How can you make your page more boring so that the important stuff stands out? Stop decorating your pages with unnecessary graphics and background scrolling videos and whatever other stuff your designers put in there. And if you're a designer, like I'm a frustrated artist myself, remember, this is business. This is not creative expression. So make your site boring and emphasize the calls to action, and you're going to get a lot more money landing in your bank account. I want to finish off with one final thought, and that is the power of free. One thing that you're going to find is that there's a huge difference between free and any kind of cost. And that is because when we consider a cost, to us, that's like the loss of a resource. Remember I was talking about pain and loss avoidance? Well, forking over money, giving you my money, is a form of loss. I lost a resource. Now I don't, if I gave you my money, I can't spend it with someone else to get something else I need. So we experience that as a loss. But if you give something free, That's a pretty black and white thing. It doesn't cost me anything, so therefore no loss. It doesn't trigger those lost parts of the brain. So free triggers safety, and it also engages on a social level for humans in particular, a form of reciprocity. If you came to someone's house, most likely you'd bring them a gift. You'd kind of have to be a real pig to show up at their house and eat their food and spend your time with them and not bring anything, especially the first time you meet. So free is much more powerful than low price. It's just worlds apart. Consider, as in terms of practical stuff, testing free versus low cost trials, if that's a possibility. If you can build it in so you make money on the back end and can lose a little bit on the trial, if the math works for that, you're going to get much better response with free versus low cost. Free like this event, absolutely. And figure stuff, what other stuff you can offer besides your main product or service that you can deliver free. What does that audiobook version of your book cost you? Nothing. Give it to me for free. A warranty that I'll probably never use. Give it to me for free. You can put value on it, but you should give it to me for free. All right. Well, we've covered a lot. I have a few kind of closing thoughts here, and then I'll throw it back over to Valentin. I just want you to stop thinking about the technology. We're all measuring stuff. It's great we have analytics and even split testing tools, but it's not ultimately about the technology. It's about what we're trying to influence, and that's the human brain. So it's about the biology, not the technology. As a marketer, if you root yourself deeply in these evergreen, evolutionary kind of ideas of how we think, you're going to be successful across all of your campaigns. Some of you may know me, some of you may not. Here's some quick background. I used to run a digital agency called Site Tuners, and we created over 1.2 billion in value for our clients. Know a little bit about this conversion rate optimization thing. I've run conferences and written books about it and so on. These days, I'm focusing on keynote speaking and on marketing training, both virtual and website reviews online. I've worked with a few clients you've probably heard of. This, like I said, this will all be in the deck, so I'm just going to zoom through this. One thing that I want to offer you, I know that we're all in these really hard times, and you guys are the smart ones because you're here sharpening your knife, sharpening your axe, learning to be better people and not stopping or pausing during this crisis. Well, there's two things that I'm sure of. If you're a marketer, your business just took a dive during this time. This is affecting the whole world, and we all have to hang together. The other thing I'm sure of is this is all going to bounce back, but we all have to get through this time. I have a very detailed website review. You can click the green button there at the bottom of your control panel if you want to check it out. And normally I charge a lot of money for this, $5,000, and guarantee satisfaction, but I don't want money to be an issue in these times. If any of you need a hard perspective, a hard third-party look at your site, an honest look at your ugly baby, I don't want price to be a consideration. So Valentin and I have talked, and everyone that's listening to this webinar, I'm just going to offer to you guys, just pay what you can. I don't care how much you pay. Just reach out to me. You can see the contact there at the bottom, tim@timash.com. And please, I'll be glad to do the review. Just pay whatever you can, and that's good enough. Let's get through this together. And I'm very grateful that you're here listening. And I want to thank OmniConvert again for putting on such a fantastic event.
Thank you, Tim, for being part of eCommerce Growth Summit. It's been great, and for you out there, you'll be having the email from Tim on our Slack group. Coming up next, we will have to thank again to Timash and say bye-bye to him.
My pleasure. Bye-bye.
Up next is going to be TJ Gamble, who is going to talk about the e-commerce funnel, the proper way to architect an e-commerce site. See you there.
As an e-commerce manager, you want to stop spending money on expensive ads. OmniConvert Explore helps you improve conversion through A/B testing, personalization, and surveys. Understand that growth is also a matter of retention, not only acquisition. With OmniConvert Reveal, you'll understand segments, monitor customer experience, and nurture your customers on every channel.